Okay. Now, on April 29th, okay, so we've talked now about April 4th and 5th, the text between the shooter and his friend. Okay, we just finished that, correct?
Correct.
Okay, now I want to go to April 29th, and this is exhibit number 104. You testified about a text thread that went between Jennifer Crumbley and the shooter's friend's mother, correct?
Yes, ma'am.
Now, in this text thread, the moms are, you would agree with me, talking about the difficulties of online school and how it's wreaked havoc essentially on their kids.
Correct.
Okay, and they start off by talking because Jennifer is telling the friend's mother that Ethan is not going to bowling, correct?
Correct.
And she says he's been acting kind of depressed. I don't know what's going on, correct?
Correct.
And she says, I'm not sure if there's something bothering him at school. He doesn't really feel good. I can't get anything out of him, correct?
Correct.
She doesn't say anything in here like he's seeing things, he's hallucinating, I'm noticing that he's paranoid, correct?
Correct.
She uses the word, he appears to be somewhat depressed. Depressed is the word she uses.
Correct.
In terms of the word depressed, that could have meanings.
Objection, speculation.
Oh, he's not going to explain what being depressed means.
Well, that was actually my exact question, was just, you can't explain what it means. That was my question.
It means different things to different people, different professions. Right?
You answered my question. That was my question. Thank you. Okay. I'm sorry. May I continue?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
So then they're talking about how the shooter and his friend are happy when they're together, and Mrs. Crumbley was concerned, based on these text messages, that there had been something going on between the shooter and his friend, but it's clear that's not an issue, correct?
Correct.
So these text messages, Mrs. Crumbley is, you would agree with me that overall, she is indicating an interest in figuring out what's wrong with her son.
She's pointing out things that she's aware of.
Okay? And this text thread, there are more texts between Jennifer Crumbley and the friend's mother, correct?
Correct.
And there's one other set that we're going to talk about, but this evidence about, there's not any further explanation of what the word depressed means in the messages or not, correct?
Correct.
All we have is what's in these text messages. I'm sorry, scratch that. Okay, so this is on 4/29. We can agree that obviously on that date, Mrs. Crumbley made representations using the word depressed.
Correct.
Okay. The next set of text messages with the shooter's friend's mother were admitted as Exhibit 105. And we can agree these are months and months later, in October of 2021, correct?
That's correct.
So this jury is seeing texts from April 29th and then October 31st.
That's correct.
On October 31st, there is discussion between Jennifer and the shooter's friend's mother about the decision they had to make to send the friend away, correct?
There wasn't discussion, she didn't reply back till the 4th of November, but Jennifer texted her or sent a message to her.
Okay, send a message to her asking how they're doing, saying they're thinking about them.
Correct.
Okay, and the friend's mom writes back talking about how hard it is. I appreciate you checking on our family, those kind of things, correct?
Correct.
And in these texts, Jennifer mentions, I know Ethan misses him, meaning his friend, correct?
Correct.
And she's asking just how things are going for the friend who's away.
Correct.
Okay. Now, at the end of these text messages, there's a few texts from December of 2021, correct?
Correct.
Now, those text messages are not about anything related to the shooter being sad or depressed, correct? Those text messages are after the shooting has taken place, correct?
Correct.
And those text messages, there's not many. We're only talking about a couple. The friend's mother asks if Ethan is safe on November 30th, correct?
Correct.
So on the day of the shooting, when the friend's mother asks at 3:47, is Ethan home safe? It would be fair, and if you don't know the answer, you can tell me, it would be fair to assume she's asking, is he safe from the shooting?
You can't answer that question, and these are Facebook messages, not text.
Yeah, he doesn't know.
Okay. So Jennifer Crumbley says, I'm sure you've seen the news, and ultimately says, I'm sick to my stomach, correct?
Correct.
And she mentions to the friend's mother that they're getting threats all over social media, which is something we talked about earlier, correct?
Correct.
And she also says that they're staying in a hotel because the news is camped out at their house.
Correct.
Yes?
Yes.
During your testimony, you admitted some GPS location information.
Yes.
And if you need to see the exhibits, let me know, but I think these will be simple questions. When you provided the jury evidence that James was at the gun store on the 26th, we can agree Jennifer was not at the store when the gun was purchased, correct?
Correct.
And when that day, there was a video on the 26th that the shooter made of him holding the gun. It's a short video that was admitted as Exhibit 417. Do you recall that little video?
Yes, I do.
And in that little video, we can't see who else is around while the shooter is filming himself with holding the Sig Sauer gun.
In the video, correct.
And we don't know, obviously, who was present in the home or in the room even with him.
Correct.
That was the day the gun was bought.
Correct.
And the shooter took that video himself, as far as we can tell.
It was on his phone, yes. It was on his phone.
And he, and it was a video that he sent to, it was, I'm sorry, let me back up. There were also photographs taken that day of the gun.
Correct.
The day they purchased it.
Correct.
Jennifer Crumbley actually posted a photo that was taken of the gun.
After they went to the gun range?
No, the day before, on Friday, the day the gun was bought, and if you don't recall, you can just, I believe it came in through the witness before you, and so if you don't know, you can just let me know.
Yeah, I don't know.
Okay, thank you. So the gun was purchased on the 26th, and the next day is Saturday, the 27th, correct?
Correct.
On the 27th, we know that James Crumbley was door dashing that day.
Correct.
That's the day that the shooter and his mother went to the gun range.
Correct.
That is the day where there was posts about a mother-son experience at the range, in terms of shooting the gun, going to shoot the gun.
I remember those, yes.
Okay. Now, there is not any information about where the gun was stored or placed in the Crumbley's home overnight between the 26th and the 27th.
Judge, I'm going to object. These exhibits weren't introduced to this witness. It's inappropriate to ask this witness of those questions. Agent Brandon testified yesterday. It's the same questions that she asked him at cross-examination. He doesn't have the foundation to give that sort of testimony.
Well, I guess I don't understand the question. Are you asking, is there any communication on a text or a Facebook or a picture about whether the guns were where they were stored or whether they were
Yeah.
Okay, so did you?
On the phone, no, I did not find.
Also, the very minimum, we should be given the opportunity to review the exhibit before he's asked the question.
I don't know if she specifically asked him about exhibit.
She was asking about Instagram posts.
Oh, the Instagram post. Okay. All right. There's no Instagram posts about storage or being locked up or anything like that.
Not that I saw, no, ma'am.
Okay.
You didn't see any locked guns on Instagram.
Locked guns, no.
And the evidence that you showed us from the 27th, there's not any information about who put the gun in the vehicle that drove the gun to the target, to the shooting range, correct?
I don't know anything about that.
We don't know anything about who did anything aside from the fact that we know when Mrs. Crumbley and her son went over to the shooting range.
I don't know anything about the transportation of the gun, no.
Okay. We know when they got to the range that Mrs. Crumbley and her son went in and they shot some targets, correct?
Correct.
Well, the ATF guy testified to that. Do you know that? Video?
I do know the video, yes.
Oh, okay.
The gun range video?
All right.
I have seen it.
Okay.
Okay. And in terms of the text messages and all the evidence that you have reviewed, from the night of the 27th to the 28th, there are not any text messages or Facebook messages about where the gun was that night, where it was in the home, where it was in general, correct?
Correct, I don't know anything
Okay.
about that.
In these same days that the Crumbleys, that Mr. Crumbley bought the gun and Mom and the shooter went to the shooting range, from the evidence that you talked about in front of the jury, it's clear one of their horses has some kind of an issue, a health issue going on, correct?
Correct.
So as the evidence is unfolding about what's happening on those days in terms of what the parents were doing, there's also talk about medication for the horse and things along those lines.
Correct.
When you testified about the search on Mrs. Crumbley's phone about clinical depression, you don't know anything other than what was typed in when she searched for information about clinical depression, correct?
Correct.
You don't know if that was her looking up information for herself?
Correct.
You don't know if that's looking for information about the shooter?
Correct.
or if it's looking up information about some other person.
That's correct.
On the 29th, that was a Monday. Does that sound right?
Yes, ma'am.
Of November, you mean?
Of November.
Yes.
I'm sorry, of November.
Yes.
Okay. And that was the day that the voicemail was left that was played as evidence as Exhibit 115 from Miss Fine. Do you know what voicemail I'm talking about?
Yes, I recall it.
Okay. So going a little bit backwards, that day, on that Monday, the voicemail indicates that Ethan was caught looking at bullets on his phone, correct?
That's correct.
The voicemail, we know, we saw lots of evidence, was left on Jennifer's cell phone.
Correct.
We know Jennifer Crumbley listened to the voicemail.
That's correct.
We all heard the voicemail.
Correct.
And the voicemail did not ask Jennifer Crumbley to call back, to return the phone call, correct?
I don't believe so.
That message indicated that Ethan was not in any trouble, but the teacher wanted, or Miss Fine wanted to make Mrs. Crumbley aware that they
Judge,
had had
the
a
exhibit
discussion.
speaks for itself. He can't interpret the exhibit.
Yeah, that's the best evidence of what was said, right?
Okay.
You can have all the exhibits, so you can listen to it again. Yeah.
The conversation, in that conversation, there is talk about I can play the exhibit. I'm just going to ask about one quote, and if I need to play the exhibit, then I'll play it.
Okay, let's hear the question.
At the end of the voicemail, Miss Fine says that it's perfectly normal and healthy.
I can't remember what she was referring to when she said that, but I do remember those words.
Okay. The tone of that conversation was not one that, well, I'm sorry. The content of that conversation did not ask Mrs. Crumbley to come over to the school or anything along those lines, correct?
Correct.
And then we did see evidence that you testified about showing that Mrs. Crumbley asked her son about that voicemail, correct?
Correct.
And her text to him was evidence we saw as Exhibit 117, where she writes to her son, seriously, bullets, correct?
Correct.
And we saw the exchange in Exhibit 117. The shooter writes back to her, I'm in no trouble.
Correct.
Judge, counsel has to show the witness the exhibits
I can do that. I'm sorry.
in the entire exhibit.
Okay, we'll do the whole thing. All right, so this is Exhibit 117. And as I asked, and I think you already answered, it starts off seriously, looking up bullets in school.
Correct.
And the Jennifer's son responds, I already went to the office for that. He admits he was. We can agree that's the content of this conversation, correct?
Was that he went to the office for that? That's the last thing you said.
He says that I already went to the office for that.
Yes, correct.
Okay, so I'm moving down and he's explaining, or at least texting, what he was looking up and saying it's because he was curious.
Correct.
In his words, on page 199, he says completely harmless.
Correct.
And based on the voicemail that we heard from Miss Fine, it sounded like.
Objection, sounded like.
Okay, I apologize. I'll move on. Jennifer told her son the school left me a voicemail, correct?
Correct.
And asked her son, did you show them your new gun?
Correct.
And obviously he says, no, he did not. And he says, I did not show them the pic, my God.
Correct.
Okay. Again, says it was a harmless act.
Correct.
Gives more explanation to her.
Correct.
And ultimately, at the end of the conversation, he asks if he can hear the voicemail later, and she says she saved it.
Correct.
After that, there's conversation that was admitted in Exhibit 118. I've put it on the screen.
Judge, if counsel is just going to read exhibits, it's not a cross-examination. And I want to get to my redirect. I want to finish this witness
So we
today.
gotta finish this witness.
Your Honor, I find that when I'm asking questions, if I don't go step by step, I have to go backwards and go step by
You
step by
have to
step
follow
by
the rules
step.
of evidence. You can't ask the witness to guess.
Yeah,
There are
we've heard all
some
this.
questions that could just simply be answered, and they're not being answered. So I have to go step by step by step
Okay,
when
let's
it's
do
not
it.
happening.
Let's do it. Well, yeah, but they're sort of hearing the same. Direct, so.
The evidence that was admitted as Exhibit 118 shows there was a conversation between James and Jennifer Crumbley about the issue with the bullets at school.
Correct.
We went through the timeline from November 30th, 2021 in great detail earlier. You would agree with that.
Correct.
And obviously, you've collected all of the information you could from the 30th off the cell phones of James Crumbley, Jennifer Crumbley, and the shooter to look at in your investigation.
Correct.
It's fair to say that you did not seek a search warrant for people at the school who dealt with the shooter that day.
Hold on. To clarify the form of the question, seek a search warrant for the people at the school. That's not even an investigative
Who?
method.
Okay,
A search warrant for who?
For the people, right, exactly.
Yeah, there's a lot of.
all right, sorry, I'll back up.
And for what?
Okay, you're aware that Jennifer and James Crumbley went to the school. We saw the video of them walking in for the appointment, correct?
Correct.
You're aware they met with Sean Hopkins.
Correct.
You're aware there was conversation in a meeting.
Correct.
You did not at any time seek the messages off of the devices of Mr. Hopkins, correct?
That's not for me to decide. That's the officer in charge of the case to decide what to collect and bring to me to get data for them.
Okay, so that's not something you did. That's my only question.
It's not something that we would do in computer crime, correct?
Now, when the text was sent at 9:31, the first thing that Mrs. Crumbley, that we can tell she received that morning that was of alarm was the altered map sheet that the shooter had written on, correct?
Can you pull it up real quick just so I can see?
Sure. So that was Exhibit 123.
Correct, okay.
Okay. So exhibit 123, now, when we say altered math sheet, the shooter initially wrote things on a math paper that was introduced as a different exhibit. It was introduced as exhibit 74. And I'll open that up. So I've got exhibit 74 on the right, and we can agree that was initially what the shooter wrote on his math paper.
Correct.
And after writing all the writings on exhibit 74, he added to the math paper and added the things that we see on exhibit 123.
Correct.
Now, the first thing that Mrs. Crumbley receives is exhibit 123, which is the altered drawing, correct?
Correct.
And in terms of what's on the drawing, it speaks for itself, but it has things like, I love my life so much, harmless act, we're all friends here. It has a bunch of writings like that on there. The jury can see what's on there. It speaks for itself, fair to say?
It does, yes.
Okay. And when Mrs. Crumbley got that, we know that she immediately, because we have the timestamps, sent Mr. Crumbley a message to let him know that something was going on.
Correct.
And in the text messages or Facebook messages, which were admitted as exhibit 125, and I'll put it up. It's specifically, Mrs. Crumbley specifically sent photos over to, I'm sorry, scratch that. Jennifer's first message at 9:33 says, call now, now being in capital letters, correct?
Correct.
And emergency.
Correct.
And her next text right after says emergency again.
Correct.
And then we know that Mr. Crumbley texts back.
Correct.
And that's in a separate, it's further down in the thread. And his response is, my God, WTF, which stands for what the fuck, correct?
Correct.
So the parents, we can agree that as soon as the math paper is received by Jennifer Crumbley, there's conversation between the parents.
Correct.
In addition to the messages, there's also phone conversation.
Correct.
And at 10:04, we know that Jennifer Crumbley is heading to the school, physically going to the school, correct?
Correct.
And at 10:05, we can see she's sending texts saying, I'm very concerned.
Correct.
We know, obviously, they get to the school and have a meeting with the counselor.
Correct.
And we know that that meeting only lasted 12 minutes long. That was your testimony.
Correct.
We don't have any kind of record or recording of that meeting in the counselor's office.
Not that I've made aware of, no. Correct.
After leaving the counselor's office, we have the text messages that Jennifer Crumbley sent Kira Pennick.
Correct.
Okay. We have text messages that Jennifer Crumbley sent Andy Smith, which were introduced and admitted.
Correct.
And it's fair to say that Jennifer Crumbley is telling at least those people about what's going on with her son or that she's dealing with something.
Correct.
Now, we know Jennifer Crumbley goes back to work. We saw the exhibit showing her re-entering back at her office.
Correct.
Okay, and we know that at some point, there's obviously a notice out that was admitted. The Oxford High School has there's an alarm of an active shooter, correct?
Yes, correct.
Upon hearing that, we saw the evidence about Mr. and Mrs. Crumbley heading back to the school, correct?
Correct.
And all of that evidence speaks for itself in terms of the timeline of events that happened. And you went through those times on the record already, so we don't need to do that again.
Correct.
In those messages, there was not anything from Jennifer Crumbley saying, anything along the lines of, I think Ethan might shoot people today.
Object to the form of the question, anything along the lines?
Okay, I'll rephrase. Jennifer Crumbley, the text messages that we have are the extent of the text messages. You've provided everything from November 30th. Everything we've gone through, there's not more text messages that this jury's not seen. Is that a fair statement?
Well, hold on.
On November
What date?
30th.
On November 30th.
Correct.
Okay. And we can see the messages that Jennifer sent over to her son at the time. You introduced those when you testified.
Correct.
And there's various exchanges, obviously between them that speak for themselves, and the jury can read those.
There were changes, yes.
Okay. And there is a message that says, ultimately for Mrs. Crumbley, and if you need to see it, you can let me know, Ethan, don't do it.
After he was in custody, yes. She said that message was sent.
And at the time that message was sent, we don't know what Jennifer Crumbley knew in her head.
Correct.
All we can do is look at the evidence and read what's before us and what's been admitted in the testimony.
In the text messages?
Yes.
Correct.
You testified about alarm images in exhibits 149 and 150. Do you recall that?
I do, yes.
Okay, so I'm gonna just put up 149 and 150. Okay, and I just want to make sure I understand this correctly. This was an alarm clock on the track phone. Is that right?
Correct.
So this is an alarm clock set for 6:30 in the morning and 6:45 in the morning that would have been for Saturday, December 4th.
Correct.
Is that accurate?
Yes.
Okay, so these alarms, from what you can tell, were set on the day before, on the 3rd.
Correct.
Okay, and then again, there was some testimony, and I believe we've mostly covered this. Ultimately, when you looked at the cell phone between Jennifer Crumbley and Kira Pennick, you testified, I believe, that there were 26 messages still on the phone.
Correct.
And from the data, you could see there was actually 4,047 that existed at one time between them.
Correct.
So obviously, many messages had been deleted between Kira and Jennifer Crumbley by Jennifer Crumbley on her phone.
That's correct.
And again, there's not any texts or anything that say that have explanations about deleting things. All we know is that they were deleted.
Correct. Just that, yes.
May I have one moment, please? So there's also, I just have one point of clarification and then I'm done, promise. There are some messages that say that they are unsent. What's the difference between unsent or deleted?
Deleted would tell me that it's just not there anymore. You would delete the message that says it was unsent even.
Okay, so the unsent messages, it's possible for someone to send a message to someone else, but before it's received to unsend it and recall it back. Is that a fair statement?
I believe also if it was received, that you can unsend it, you can pull it back, yes.
Okay, and throughout some of the evidence we've seen, it appears that messages were unsent at times.
Correct.
I have nothing further.
Tell me how long